20. Sydney Colson. Sydney Colson will always be remembered more for her charisma than her stat sheet. By the time she joined the Fever late in her career, Colson had already built her reputation as one of the funniest, most magnetic personalities in women's basketball. On the court, limited minutes, fringe rotation role, rarely the deciding factor. But her presence mattered in a different way. The Fever, drowning in years of irrelevance, needed leaders who could loosen the locker room and keep a rebuilding roster from falling apart mentally. Colson provided that. Veteran experience, good vibes, and a reminder that the WNBA isn't only about buckets. Still, in terms of all-time Fever greatness, she sits at the bottom. Her production doesn't match the legends. Her impact was cultural, not foundational. Colson made people love her, but she never made Indiana win. That's why she starts this list. 19. Anna DeForge. Anna DeForge came to Indiana in the mid-2000s as a sharp shooting guard with grit. She was tough, competitive, and gave the Fever an edge on the perimeter during her short stint. But the truth is, her impact was minimal compared to the players who came before and after. DeForge was a stopgap, not a cornerstone. She put in solid minutes, knocked down shots, and earned respect for her work ethic, but she never shifted the franchise's direction. For a team always searching for that extra gear, DeForge was a role player, useful but replaceable. Fans remember her as part of the supporting cast, not the headline act. Respectable career, but on Indiana's all-time scale, she lands near the bottom. 18. Ebony Hoffman. Drafted by the Fever in 2004, Ebony Hoffman carved out her niche as a gritty forward who brought toughness every night. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't a star, but she did the dirty work. Rebounding, banging in the post, setting the tone physically. Hoffman peaked in 2008, earning Most Improved Player honors, showing she could chip in offensively when needed. But like many Fever players of that era, she existed in the shadow of what Indiana was building, a contender waiting for its breakthrough. Hoffman never reached all-star status, never pushed Indiana over the hump. Still, she left her fingerprints on the team's identity, a grinder, a warrior, but not a legend. That's why she sits low on this list, essential in her moment, but not a face of the franchise. 17. Natalie Williams. On paper, Natalie Williams should rank higher. A Hall of Famer, one of the greatest rebounders in women's basketball history, and a force in Utah before joining Indiana in 2003. But her Fever years? Forgettable. By the time she landed in Indianapolis, she was past her peak, and though she remained steady inside, she didn't carry the same dominance she once had. For Fever fans, her name carries weight because of her overall career, not her specific Indiana impact. She's remembered more as a great who passed through than someone who defined the franchise. That's the painful truth. A legendary player, but not a legendary Fever. She earns a spot on this list because of her resume, but her time in Indy wasn't transformative. 16. Yolanda Griffith. Another Hall of Famer whose Fever stint feels more like a cameo than a chapter. By 2009, when Yolanda Griffith joined Indiana, her best years were behind her. This was the same Griffith who had dominated with Sacramento, won MVPs, and anchored one of the toughest teams in W history. But in Indiana, she was a role player, a veteran presence for a team gearing toward contention. Fans respected her toughness, her leadership, and her reputation, but she didn't change Indiana's trajectory. She was a legend on loan, not a Fever icon. That's why she lands here, respected, admired, but never truly theirs. 15. Shavonte Zealous. When Shavonte Zealous arrived in Indiana, she wasn't supposed to be a franchise shifter. She was a streaky guard known for bursts of offense and energy off the bench. But in the 2012 title run, Zealous flipped the script. She gave the Fever a spark when they needed it most, scoring in bunches and playing with fearless aggression. The problem? Consistency. For every game where she looked unstoppable, there were stretches where she disappeared. That's why her legacy sits in the middle. She wasn't a long-term cornerstone, but she'll forever be remembered for her playoff heroics. Zealous didn't define the Fever, but she delivered when the moment called. And in a championship season, that's enough to keep her name alive in franchise history. 14. Candace Dupree. Candace Dupree brought a steady veteran presence to the Fever in the post-Catchings years, but her timing was brutal. She arrived during a franchise decline, tasked with carrying a team that no longer had its soul. Dupree was smooth, efficient, and reliable, earning all-star nods in Indiana. But fans never connected with her the way they did with the championship core. She was consistent, not dynamic, solid, not legendary. Her numbers were strong, but they didn't translate into wins. Dupree deserves credit for professionalism in the middle of a mess, but her legacy feels more like a bridge between eras than a pillar. A respected vet, not an icon. 13. Katie Douglas. Katie Douglas gave Indiana something they desperately needed: shooting and swagger. A local star from Purdue, she brought both talent and identity when she returned home. Douglas was a two-way wing who could hit big shots and defend tough matchups, making her a critical piece of Indiana's finals teams. She wasn't the engine, but she was the sharp edge, the player who punished defenses for focusing too much on catchings. Fans loved her toughness, her local ties, and her willingness to step into the fire. Still, she never reached face of the franchise level. Her role was more Robin than Batman, but as far as Fever legends go, Douglas carved a permanent spot. 12. Tully Bevilacqua. Tully Bevilacqua wasn't supposed to be here. An undersized Aussie guard, undrafted, overlooked, never meant to last. Instead, she became one of Indiana's most beloved players. Bevilacqua was pure grit, diving for loose balls, hounding star guards, making life miserable for opponents every night. She was the definition of a glue player, and in Indiana, she was more than that. Bevilacqua's defense and leadership gave the Fever their identity heading into the 2012 championship years. Fans adored her because she embodied toughness. She wasn't a star scorer, but she didn't need to be. In Fever lore, Bevilacqua is remembered as a cult hero, proof that heart and hustle can matter just as much as points. 11. Tamika Whitmore. Tamika Whitmore is one of the most underrated Fever players ever. A rugged forward who could score inside and bang on the boards, she brought physicality at a time when Indiana was still building toward contender status. Whitmore gave them stability in the post-catching's front line, taking pressure off the perimeter and anchoring the paint. She wasn't flashy, but she was reliable, the kind of player who didn't need headlines to impact games. Whitmore never got the star treatment, but ask her teammates and they'll tell you she was essential. In a franchise filled with stars and role players, she sits right in the middle, not iconic, but indispensable. A steady presence who helped push Indiana closer to greatness. 10. Brianna Turner. Brianna Turner isn't a longtime Fever staple yet, but since joining in 2024, she's given Indiana something they've lacked for years: defensive bite in the paint. At 6'3", Turner brings length, rebounding, and an interior toughness that pairs perfectly with Aaliyah Boston. She isn't the star of the show, but she makes Boston's life easier by taking on the dirty work. That's why she's here. Impact, not flash. Turner doesn't need to score 20 a night. She needs to clog the lane, block shots, and keep Indiana from getting bullied inside, and she's done that. Her arrival symbolized Indiana finally surrounding its young stars with veterans who know their role. She won't go down as a franchise legend, but she'll be remembered as a crucial piece of the Fever's defensive identity during their climb back to relevance. 9. Briann January. If Tamika Catchings was the soul of the Fever, Briann January was the teeth. Drafted in 2009, she became one of the league's premier perimeter defenders, tormenting guards with relentless pressure. January's impact went beyond defense. She was a steady floor general who hit clutch shots in big games, especially during the 2012 title run. She embodied everything the Fever stood for: toughness, resilience, no-nonsense basketball. Fans loved her because she wasn't about highlight reels. She was about winning. In a league where flashy scorers dominate headlines, January carved her legacy by doing the gritty work that wins championships. That's why her name still carries weight in Fever history. Not the flashiest, not the most celebrated, but absolutely one of the most essential. 8. Kelsey Mitchell. For nearly a decade, Kelsey Mitchell has been one of the most lethal scorers in the WNBA. Drafted number 2 overall in 2018, she came in with heavy expectations and delivered buckets from day one. Mitchell's 3-level scoring, quick release, and fearlessness make her one of the league's toughest guards to cover. The knock? For years, her brilliance came in losing seasons. She was the star of a broken franchise, piling up points with no playoff payoff. But with Boston and Clark arriving, Mitchell finally has the supporting cast to showcase her game in meaningful moments. By 2025, she's not just a stat stuffer, she's a cornerstone of the Fever's resurgence. Mitchell will be remembered as the scorer who suffered through the wilderness years, then thrived once the franchise caught up to her. 7. Aaliyah Boston. Aaliyah Boston changed everything for Indiana. Drafted number 1 overall in 2023, she immediately gave the Fever a franchise anchor in the post. Rookie of the Year, All-Star, Face of the Rebuild. Boston's presence restored credibility to a team drowning in irrelevance. By 2025, she's established herself as one of the most dominant young bigs in the league, a force inside who controls the glass, defends the rim, and commands double teams. But what makes her stand out isn't just numbers, it's poise. She plays with a maturity beyond her years, instantly becoming a leader. Boston represents the bridge from the Catchings era to the Fever's next great chapter. She's not just the present, she's the future. 6. Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark isn't just a player, she's a phenomenon. Drafted number 1 overall in 2024, she turned the Fever from an afterthought into the league's biggest draw. Attendance records, viewership records, merchandise sold out everywhere. Clark's deep shooting range and flashy playmaking electrified the WNBA, and by 2025, she's no longer just hype. She's producing double-doubles, highlight passes, clutch threes. Critics wondered if her game would translate. She silenced them. Clark is still young, still growing, but her impact has already transformed Indiana into must-watch basketball again. More importantly, she's brought a decade of lost fans back into the fold. Clark is more than a shooter. She's a movement, and the Fever are riding her wave into relevance. 5. Katie Douglas. Peak years. Katie Douglas wasn't just a shooter, she was a fire starter. When she came to Indiana in 2008, the Fever needed more than role players around Catchings. They needed someone who could go toe-to-toe with the league's best wings. Douglas answered the call. She brought a mean streak, a chip on her shoulder, and a jumper that punished defenses who dared to sag off. Fans loved her because she wasn't just skill, she was edge. In the 2012 title run, she gave Indiana another weapon, another voice, another fighter. She wasn't the franchise face, but she was the knife at the opponent's throat when Catchings was the hammer. The Fever's championship doesn't happen without Douglas. That's why her name still cuts deep in Indiana lore. 4. Tamika Whitmore, prime Fever years. Tamika Whitmore was the bridge between Indiana being cute playoff fodder and serious contenders. She didn't have Catchings' spotlight or Douglas's local roots, but she brought brute force inside. Whitmore was a grinder, a player who gave the Fever the physicality they needed to compete against the Detroits and Sacramentos of the mid-2000s. She took the hits, dished them right back, and gave Indiana legitimacy in the trenches. She's not flashy in memory, but she was foundational. Without Whitmore, Indiana doesn't toughen up into the bruising contender that eventually broke through. She doesn't get the same shine as others, but she's the one who set the tone, and that matters. 3. Tully Bevilacqua, championship anchor. Tully Bevilacqua was 5'7", with the heart of a heavyweight. Undrafted, overlooked, and yet in Indiana, she became the Fever's identity. Fans adored her because she played like every possession was her last, diving on the floor, pestering stars full court, making life miserable for anyone who dribbled near her. She wasn't supposed to last in the league. She lasted 14 years. She wasn't supposed to start on a champion. She anchored one. In 2012, Bevilacqua's leadership and defensive pressure were the spine of the Fever's run. She gave Catchings a backcourt dog to complement her frontcourt dominance. Tully wasn't just a role player. She was the embodiment of Fever basketball. Tough, relentless, unapologetic. 2. Briann January, career arc. Briann January never got enough credit. Drafted in 2009, she spent nearly a decade as Indiana's defensive pit bull. She locked up elite guards night after night, earning all defensive honors while hitting clutch shots when the Fever needed them. January was never the loudest voice, but she was the backbone, the steady hand who kept Indiana sharp season after season. Fans respected her because she was dependable. Teammates loved her because she sacrificed glory for grit. In the 2012 title run, her defensive clamps were just as important as Catchings' scoring. January's legacy isn't about flash, it's about identity. She was the blood and bone of Fever culture, and without her, the dynasty attempt never gets off the ground. 1. Tamika Catchings. No debate, no hesitation. Tamika Catchings is the Indiana Fever. Drafted in 2001, she missed her first season with injury. From 2002 until her retirement in 2016, she carried the franchise on her back. MVP, Finals MVP, Defensive Player of the Year 5 times, 10-time All-Star. Catchings didn't just play for Indiana, she was Indiana. Her relentless hustle, her passion, her fire, she gave the Fever everything. And finally, in 2012, she delivered the one thing the franchise had been chasing, a championship. Catchings wasn't just great, she was transcendent. She played harder than anyone, cared more than anyone, and left the game with no doubt she was one of the greatest to ever do it. The Fever will never have another Tamika Catchings. She is the gold standard, the retired jersey, the Hall of Famer, the reason this franchise matters in WNBA history, period.